Hello everyone and welcome to the Nostalgia Critic The Wall review. Now, for those who know my channel's history, I used to have this video up back in 2019, early 2020, and it did pretty well. It was my highest performing video, but I decided at one point to take it down. Now, if you remember from me talking previously in some update videos, the reason why I took them down was partly because of the ending. I felt the ending of it was a bit too insensitive, and it was definitely rightfully called out by various people, so I wanted to change the ending and re-edit it. I understand that it probably felt more personable that way, but seeing how there was some backlash to it, I decided to re-edit the ending, have a new ending sequence, monologue thing shot somewhere else, and, you know, it's not as insensitive. The other reason why is because there was a lot of unwarranted hate towards a particular animator named Fena, which I will talk about in the review. I have edited new segments into the review you are about to watch. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I really have to say about the re-release. It's largely unaltered, but there is, again, a brand new ending. I cut the original one. And plus, there is a new explanation for Fena. And so, before we begin, I just want to say, do not go and harass the original people that I mentioned in this video. Do not harass people in the Channel Awesome community. Do not harass people in Fena's community or Fena themselves, or even, just anyone in particular. And so, with that out of the way, let's now dive into my original review of Nostalgia Critic's review of The Wall. There was a time when I was considered a fan of Nostalgia Critic. Hell, there was a time when an alternate universe version of me did a show much like Nostalgia Critic called Flashback, which admittedly wasn't that good, so I just severed my connection with his universe for being too embarrassing. I had enjoyed Doug's Christmas and commercial videos, but since the change to channel movement, I haven't had the same feeling when I used to watch his old videos. I have no ill will towards him or anyone there at Channel Awesome, but recently, Doug chose to release his review slash soundtrack of Pink Floyd's The Wall. I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for essentially eviscerating his couple months passion project, or what is considered a couple months passion project, but it has to be said. This video is the worst review of a movie I have ever seen. Not just bad takes, but it actively shits on what it is parodying, and worse, it isn't even a fucking review. You heard me, a Nostalgia Critic review is not a review. Revolutionary, I know. So let's go through his video and talk about his worst video to date. But first, here's some backstory. We don't need no education. One of the biggest rock acts of the 20th century was Pink Floyd, and naturally the success of the band in mind, a film was made based around The Wall, one of the band's most successful soundtracks to date. Roger Waters, however, had a different mindset when making the film. Waters went on to state that the album as well as the film was his personal take on the wall that was erected between him and his audience, between reality and fantasy, and every other symbolic meaning that could be tossed at the wall has come to be known for. The Wall became such a revolution in how we talk about our personal issues, being that the things that affect us like addiction, abuse, indoctrination are all things that build the walls of our boxes, and it's up to us to decide to tear down that wall. It is a film that has a lot of meaning and personal feeling put behind it. It's a true artistic expression in all of its glory. However, The Wall was trashed by critics at the time, and the film fell into slight obscurity. It has since become a cult classic film that has its fans and detractors. The film itself has some things that aren't so good, but the film boasts its amazing animations paired with moody atmospheres. My favorite of these being Goodbye Blue Sky, a melancholic atmospheric song about the horrors of greed, war, and terror befallen upon society during World War II. The entire film has so much creativity put into it, from the character designs, animation, cinematography, editing. It all feels like it's coming from a person who has felt trapped and isolated, much like the namesake of being behind a metaphorical wall. I am a massive fan of this film, and I will admit that the film has its issues, but what Nostalgia Critic did was terrible, and I will put it simply, his idols in film criticism would be very disappointed. But put that into your back pocket, we'll get back to it in Chapter 4. Alright, let's tear down this shit review. So the review starts with a recreation of the opening scene of the film, which is all well and good until we see Slipknot show up. This is where the first issue really comes in. You have a celebrity cameo from the lead singer of Slipknot, and he doesn't act at all.
I didn't even get a line. Hell, I didn't even sing a song.
Not a single word is uttered till the conclusion of this entire shitty review. His son is not much better as he has to play a younger version of his dad, and it just doesn't work for me. The only real thing he was used for in this review is to be a punchline joke at the end about SpongeBob SquarePants for some fucking reason. Oh, repeating loops of stock shoe sounds? Wow, really? You couldn't have put effort into recording some authentic sounds? You have resources to bring in Slipknot, but not the same for Foleying? The review starts off kinda normally like any review of Doug's with an intro. It makes me wonder why this review doesn't just continue with Doug relaying his thoughts, but let's continue.
Weekend evening while on your way home, when all the critics told you Pink Floyd's Wall was shite, when you thought that it was kinda alright.
Basically what this number implies is that Pink Floyd's The Wall was pretentious, which isn't really the case. The film, as well as the album, was the telling of Pink's rock star life, a character Roger had portrayed. It goes through his trauma of post-war Britain, to his lack of father figure, terrible schooling, and a downward spiral into madness, with drugs, alcohol, booze, an abusive wife, and so on. Pretentious? Not really. If you were to pay attention to the film and the album, this all makes sense, and all of it is very surface level. About 3 minutes in and we don't have any substance. Usually in the first 3 minutes, Doug would be discussing the film's plot or even trying to make a joke. But here, it is nothing but a high school slideshow of Pink Floyd rather than having any sort of production value. But then we get to the critics' opening.
Been a long time since you've seen Pink Floyd's The Wall.
I gotta say it, Doug is not that great of a singer. We will touch on this a bit more in Chapter 3, but Doug has a moderate voice for singing, but he just doesn't pull off Pink's style of musicality, even if the music has a decent instrumental attached to it. This next section is called Into the Floyd, and I gotta say, this is kinda bad.
The production was fancy, but way too damn angsty for adults to take seriously.
Critic, your production is not fancy. You at times are more angsty than this film, and not a single adult takes you seriously. Projection much?
That's why I watch, despite it being so whiny.
Whiny, huh? Okay, is it whiny that Pink addresses his life without a father? How post-war Britain basically was an abusive hellscape for him? How is any of that whiny? Oh, wait, it's because you want to complain about Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. Realize something too, Doug has not addressed the movie directly. That's because he didn't give a shit. What kind of creepypasta looking OC is that? It looks kinda bad. Again, compare this to the film. There was tons of effort put into the animation, the cinematography, set design, all of which goes to represent what the songs meant. But what sets this aspect back in this review is the scheduling. Because Doug uploads every week, they have to half-ass everything, and I realize this is made by Fenna. That fact is not oblivious to me. But you'll see what I mean when we get into the next segment. That segment being Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. Or, as Doug likes to call it, we don't need no more victimization. Doug's conclusion of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is extremely troubling. The entire thing is set up from the point of view of the American school system, which yes, has its flaws. Lines like these.
School is no laughing matter. Do you know what we teach in these walls? how to fix a car, pay your taxes, ace an interview, perform first aid, manage your insurance, cook healthy meals, or do household repairs?
Preposterous! We pay other people to do those things. We teach important things you need to know in life, like algebra, trigonometry, physics, geology, sex ed. Oh, that's right, you have letters that say you don't need to learn that. Well, it shouldn't be too important, especially in the case of that kid.
Emphasize the importance of fixing the education system for the better. But Doug fails to remember that this section of the film is set in the 1950s in Great Britain, a time of post-war reconstruction and serious societal overhauls. Part of which was a strict education system. Again, Doug thinks this is whiny when in fact it is the opposite. All the things leading up to the trial are all representative of bricks that made up his dividing wall. His school life was one of the first bricks to be laid, but no, he'd rather be disingenuous and say shit like this.
This is pandering like hell.
Hey! Who cares? All this bitching sells!
LOL, so school sucks. Grow a damn pair of balls.
This is also a sequence that lacks production value, as the CG backgrounds look half-assed with the professor swatting around at a spinning town. Okay. And then we get to one part of the review that is an honest criticism.
Wait, time out. Is this really a World War II reference?
No, it's just a bunch of kids being herded onto a train to a horrible, torturous building. Oh.
Yeah, we're really comparing this to high school?
However, the biggest problem with this critique is that it's coming from side characters, not Nostalgia Critic himself. Sure, he may have written the script, but he doesn't directly address this point himself, making this review not very personable. But then we move on to the parody of my favorite song from Pink Floyd's album, Goodbye Blue Sky. Remember why I love this song in particular? Now watch it all come crashing on Doug's face. The animation of the original led into this beautiful bird appearing in the air. What does Doug do? 3 JPEGs and some crossfades between them. This animation is lazy and just rushed. I'm sorry. I almost feel like this shouldn't have happened. Oh, and look at that. The bird says ego, even though it's clearly a symbol of the Nazi party.
Doesn't this seem too heavy? Is World War II with monsters too silly?
Just for your information, Doug, the monsters in this section were meant to symbolize the horrors of war. You would know that if you'd just analyzed the damn film and not tried to make everything into a fucking joke. But then we get to the one line that is really screwy.
So long, Oscar bait song. Smoke a bong and it will feel less wrong. So long.
This is a weird line because the song itself was released in 1979 and the film was released in 1982. It clearly wasn't going for an Oscar with this song. This next section is too boring to really dissect, so I'm just gonna fast forward and see if anything happens.
Is there anybody who cares?
Nope.
For the next 4 minutes, the song continues its anti-wall statements by making a joke about how the songs felt too slow for him. This, unironically, makes this segment boring. This next section is obviously the one people talk about a lot, and that is Doug's usage of this parody to go after outrage culture. Look, as someone who isn't much for outrage culture, until there are blatant cases for it, I can sympathize with this parody. However, coming from someone who was put into the spotlight of controversy, so much so that Cinematic Venom made a documentary about the Change the Channel movement, this part feels like Doug is retaliating against the haters of his channel and not actually making any sort of point about the song he is parodying.
All you need to do is bite off something.
Wait, so you mean to tell me that you had a budget for small animations but couldn't do shit like the Blue Sky parody? What a crock of poop. Really? It's only an hour-and-a-half long movie. Your review could easily encompass a fraction of its own running time, but no! You had to try to one-up everyone by showboating and trying to make your review stand out as something important to watch. So, now we get to the last parody. It's time for the trial. Let's see what they do.
Oh, that's that weird creature I've seen looming around.
Yes. And when I heard you were reviewing the much-to-be-desired wall,
Mom, do we have any tactical nukes? This is Lucy Lacemaker, a creation by Fenna, an animation YouTuber with a respectable audience. She comes in to say this.
but this film you have here, it fails to truly connect us to those amazing creatures and visuals. A wall does indeed exist, and it lies between the monsters and the emotion, dreams and reality, anarchy and order. Make us feel for the world, make us connect to it, so we too can suffer with pink.
This I disagree with wholeheartedly. It is easy to say that certain elements should be changed or expanded upon to make it fleshed out, but this is a musical we are talking about. Nothing needed to be changed. It's all complaining because the critic doesn't know how to read a film. All the script knows how to do is point out areas for what he would have liked in the film, not trying to understand it. Save this bit again for Chapter 4. This part is easily the best and worst part of the whole review. It's the best because it gives us something new to look at, and some of the creatures are kind of interesting to look at, but it still doesn't have polish like it should. The biggest issue with these creatures is that, unlike the film, where the characters had meaning in the story Roger was telling, Fenna's creatures have no connection whatsoever to who the Nostalgia Critic is as a character. Think of all the different characters he's portrayed or other characters that he's had in his own arsenal. Wouldn't it make sense to have some of those characters show up in this segment? Nah. We've never seen any of these characters before in his videos, so these are just one-shot cameos. Now, I shouldn't really be attacking Fenna in this. I feel like it's kind of unfair. Mostly because since the review for this movie came out, it's been revealed that Fenna had only 17 days to work on the animation. And I'll just say this, 17 days isn't a lot of time if you're an animator, especially when you're dealing with 3D art. And he does a pretty decent job for 17 days. It obviously could be a lot better. But because of Nostalgia Critic's whole thing with having to do a new review every single week, I mean, yes, he had 2 weeks really to prepare for all this, and they probably shot a lot of it behind the scenes, but this one probably needed more time to cook if you're going to have a lot of integrated animations. And there are some nice ones here too, but at the same time, it isn't well fleshed out, and I wholly blame that on Doug's schedule and also the sort of like, hey, you got 2 weeks to get this done, and then you're done, right? They couldn't just like delay the episode. I mean, they could have, but what's the point in that? We'll talk about the music later because this section has easily the worst music out of all the soundtrack. There is a part of this song that is odd though, and it really contradicts his review.
This film's not bound by characters, it's a visual affair. It never aimed to tell a story. Rather a sprawling canvas of emotion, visual splendor.
This is exactly what I am trying to say, but somehow this leads to the most baffling thing about his own video.
What'd you even think of the movie?
Well, the movie ended on such an open vagueness that only makes sense that the review end on such an open vagueness.
It's a review! That's literally the opposite of what that is!
Okay! I liked it fine.
Yeah, me too.
A little full of itself, but good music and imagination.
Fair enough.
This is easily the very worst part of the whole video. People wanted just your thoughts on the film, not a lazily done, boring, and lackluster parody short film. It should be a review. Don't leave your thoughts in the last few seconds of the video. You wasted nearly 40 minutes of people's lives on less than a minute of a summary.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
And on top of it, we don't even know what you really think. Judging by most of the songs, either you don't understand how to critique the film or the soundtrack, or you think parody is just insulting a source material rather than finding something to match with the original source.
Is there anybody out there
the soundtrack. Something I didn't bring up in Chapter 2 was Doug's promotion of the soundtrack, which is all kinds of wrong.
And I really think he outdid himself with this because this is just such a love letter to Pink Floyd's music. And
I'm not going to play the examples I brought up of the songs bashing the film. Just go back to my Another Brick in a Wall section. But seriously, you call this a love letter? This isn't love. This is bashing. And the bashing didn't even connect to your ultimate view of the film. And what's worse is that one of the songs was used to try to get back at your haters instead of actually saying anything about the original song. Aside from this, parts of this soundtrack are inaudible, particularly in the trial sequence. Here, take a listen to these, see if you can actually dissect what these sounds are.
I always said I liked how well made kitty. I will not suffer shitty. Those that bring forth naught but pity for their lack of wit and mind.
Constantly at it being lazy.
If anyone can find a lyric sheet of this song or any of the songs, I would love to read what the full lyrics are. Then I would need cybernetic eyes to fix the damage the lyrics caused to me. Remember all the times I said to remember certain things for this particular section? This is where this all pays off. One of the things Nostalgia Critic used to do is to try and understand the film while making some jokes along the way. Any good critic understands that to review a film, there needs to be an understanding of film as a medium as well as the artists who put the time and effort to be put into it. To understand a film isn't simply just knowing film terminology or pointing out story errors. It is understanding context for where, when, how, and why a film was made. The one critic that understood this was Roger Ebert, a critic Doug had made 3 videos about. It just seems that in this video, Doug forgot how to critique and try to entertain. That isn't too much of a bad thing if you're just trying to entertain. Until you realize on an entertainment level, it doesn't even work either. The jokes are just terrible, the jokes are lazy, and they're not even well fleshed out.
Our reviews are not for the artists, and not for other critics. In the case of a daily movie critic, a review is intended to help them decide if they want to see or avoid a movie. After all, it's 2 hours of their lives that they can never get back again. A review should also contain information about why and how movies are made, and perhaps some history. In my reviews, I sometimes stray off topic to enter such areas as politics, morality, and aesthetics. Some of my reviews might really belong on the op-ed page. This sometimes gives me a lot of freedom.
This quote gets to why people respected Ebert and his film critiques, something that Nostalgia Critic should take more heedance of.
Jonathan, your fantasies merge with harsh realities.
Despite Doug's video on the wall, he continues to pump out video after video, and he's obviously not going to stop, despite anyone's criticism. It's going to take a lot more to take him out, and honestly, I have no idea if he'll ever stop doing this stuff, but I agree with everyone that this is the worst video right now in film criticism, and one of the worst videos period on YouTube. Look, I could be mad at this review for a long ass time, but the one thing that this film did in retrospect was actually allow me to get to know my father a little bit more. Because you see, the one thing that I never knew much about my dad was why my dad loved Pink Floyd so much, or let alone The Wall so much. He would play that on loop almost every single time. It was one of his favorite films, and I never understood it. And I watched The Wall as a kid, and I never really understood what it meant back then. But years later, after so long, after all that I've been through, in terms of my depression and anxiety and a lot of boundaries I've put up around myself, in terms of all that, in watching The Wall again, it gave me a new sense of identity, a new fresh perspective with a new pair of eyes to look at the world and to look at myself. And that's what I have been doing for the past couple months lately. behind the scenes of this review, behind the scenes of all of my reviews, I've had a questioning of my own self, who I am, what built me up, and mostly because I felt unhappy. And on some level, I can personally connect to Pink Floyd's character in some things. Definitely not when he turns into a fascist, though, but, you know, all the mental health stuff. And that's when I realized that I had more in common with my dad and Pink Floyd than I did ever realize. In a way, we all have our own walls that we build around ourselves. It's a way of gatekeeping and guarding ourselves against the traumas of the world, against the, you know, all the wrongs that have been, you know, wronged to us, and they build our identities. But a lot of times they can also be a prison. Whether it's the one society pushes on us or the ones that we surround ourselves with. But it's up to us to find a way to better ourselves, to bust those walls down and expand. And that's kind of what I got out of The Wall in retrospect. And that is something that Doug doesn't really realize about this film. And look, I'm not saying that at the end of the day, Pink Floyd's The Wall is a masterpiece. But when you constantly make a parody that's not a parody, that doesn't understand how satire works, it makes you look like an idiot in retrospect in terms of trying to understand why the original was made, how the original was made, and then trying to parody that. There's plenty of ways you could have parodied Pink Floyd's The Wall, but the way that Doug Walker and Nostalgia Critic have lent themselves to parodying it, it just doesn't work. Mostly because there's no understanding of how and why the original was made, and that's part of it. Part of understanding satire and all this is based on your familiarity with the original product and, like, how it operates. And so part of that whole thing of subverting it in terms of satire, you have to understand it before you can criticize it. Satire is a form of criticizing, but it's also played up for laughs. And unfortunately, Doug Walker's whole thing is just blind surface level value. So yeah, there's my review of Nostalgia Critic's The Wall. A fairly bad, fairly dumb review, and it's possibly one of his worst reviews on his entire line. Like, just at all. So yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.